The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got. They're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Oh, of course, more flowers being thrown at Jayden Daniels, as they should be, but an interesting breakdown of his interception that happened over the weekend and why it may be a good thing. We'll get to that story in the Post today. There are two significant deaths to talk about, and post-playing career, I don't think they could have been more divergent. The beloved Dikembe Mutombo, who passed away at a far too young age of 58, and Pete Rose, who passed away at the age of 83, and has as complicated a legacy as perhaps any superstar athlete outside of O.J. Simpson has ever had. And we will get into all of that, some really interesting writing about Pete Rose, which I want to highlight, and we will go through the morning and talk a lot about Pete Rose, a lot about Dikembe Mutombo, and the unbelievable start that Jayden Daniels is off to. It's just incredible. But as you look at the deaths of these two Hall of Fame athletes, or one that had the numbers to be in the Hall of Fame and is not in the Hall of Fame, and the other that deservedly is in the Hall of Fame, they could not be more different. And if you are of an age where this still matters to you, that you look at a newspaper and you look below the fold and you see on the front page of the paper A1 right in the heat of an election cycle, that you see the obits for Pete Rose and Dikembe Mutombo side by side. And as I looked at them this morning, I couldn't think I could not think other than what a difference it was between their post-playing careers. Pete Rose, after he finished playing in the 1980s, was a pariah for the rest of his life. He was banned from baseball, deservedly so, for betting on the game. And as I look back on the 37, almost 38 years that I've been doing sports radio, this is the athlete that probably has consumed more time than anybody else. It was a go-to summertime topic for decades. Should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame? And callers would debate back and forth. And if you look at the numbers, I mean, there's no question about that. 4,256 hits. That's the most all-time. Career batting average of .303. All-Star 17 times. I mean, nobody could argue that he had the numbers to be in the Hall of Fame, and he knew his numbers, and he knew your numbers, and he knew everybody else's numbers. He was a baseball savant. But in the game of life, he was a dope. He made stupid decision after stupid decision, and it cost him a chance to be in the Hall of Fame. It wasn't even going to be a chance. It would have been a slam dunk if he had not engaged in these activities. And even when he was caught doing these things, had he handled things differently, he might have been reinstated and would have been in the Hall of Fame. And like we all make mistakes, maybe that mistake would have been expunged or would have been, time served or whatever, but he would have been able to be a Hall of Famer. But that was what consumed us in the 35 years since Bart Giamatti, and I was at this news conference, this was in August of 1989, where Bart Giamatti said very eloquently when he banned Pete Rose for life, though there's an asterisk on that, which I will get to, but when Bart Giamatti said at this news conference, he said, one of the game's greatest players has engaged in a variety of acts that abstain the game, and he now must live with the consequences of those acts. That is a sentence that to this day is chilling for anybody who, like me, was there to see it or saw it on television or heard it on the radio. That sums up what had happened here. Now, here are a couple of interesting things about this, which I think has been forgotten over the years. Rose went into Giamatti's office when he was confronted with overwhelming evidence that he had bet on baseball as a manager. Not necessarily as a player, though some further work that was done about 10 years ago by ESPN's investigative team found that there were some betting slips from when he was a player with the Reds. But at that point, the evidence was that he was betting on baseball and betting on his team while he was managing the Reds, which is a cardinal sin. It's up in every clubhouse that you can't bet on the game. And they confronted him with this, and they gave him an option of taking a ban. And I believe it was a 7-year ban. Like, he could have been reinstated after 7 years and possibly even managed again. But he didn't want to do that. The alternate deal was that they would ban him for life with the possibility that he could apply for reinstatement a year later. And Pete, who never wanted to admit anything, lied and said, "I never bet on baseball." Well, here are the slips, Pete. It's here. It's all right here. We got you. We got you with the goods. Nope, didn't do it. So he took the deal where he would not admit that he bet on baseball, and that baseball itself, the commissioner's office, would not say that he bet on baseball. And so after this deal was struck, there was a news conference called at a big hotel, and I went there. Reporters from all over the country were there. Howard Cosell, I remember, wandered in with his big cigar. And Giamatti was asked, "Do you think Pete Rose bet on baseball?" And he said, "If you're asking my opinion, yes." And here's the Hall of Fame part of this, which has also been forgotten. In 1989, the Hall of Fame did not have a rule that prohibited players or managers who had been banned from the game from being considered for the Hall of Fame. Shoeless Joe Jackson, who was kicked out of baseball after the Black Sox scandal in 1919, could have been considered for the Hall of Fame. There was nothing that prevented that. He just never got enough votes to be considered. But in 1989, that was not the case. And I remember Giamatti being asked, "Well, what about the Hall of Fame for Pete Rose?" And Giamatti said, "I'll be very interested to see how you guys vote," meaning the sports writers. Like, this was out of Major League Baseball's hands. This was up to the bylaws of the Hall of Fame. And the bylaws at the time said it was okay to induct a player who had been banned. And so I think Pete Rose was operating under the assumption that he would sit out for a year and that he would apply for reinstatement. He'd be brought back in the game. And when his time came, because remember, in 1989, he'd only been retired for, I think, 2 or 3 years, and the 5-year period of waiting had not yet run out, so he was not even eligible to be considered just because he hadn't been out of the game long enough. And he thought, well, I'll be reinstated, and by the time my name gets on the ballot in 1992, 1993, then I'll be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Well, Giamatti died a week later of a heart attack. Fay Vincent took over, and Rose really never did anything that would indicate any kind of contrition. In fact, the day that he was banned from baseball, he went on a QVC show hawking balls and bats. That's what he did. And one thing after another over the years, including going to jail for tax evasion, lying, trying to upstage the Hall of Fame ceremonies every year where he'd set up his table in Cooperstown and sign bats and balls. And finally, in his last year of eligibility, what would have been his last year of eligibility on the writer's ballot, which would be 2004. In other words, 20 years plus the 5 that he would have had to wait out after retiring. In his last possible year that the writers could have considered him, he wrote a book, and he admitted that he bet on baseball. But he wrote the book and released it right about the time of the vote for the class of 2004, upstaging them. And that didn't sit well at the time with Commissioner Bud Selig, and it didn't help his case as well. Finally, after this book comes out, he does admit it, clearly an attempt to try and get back in, okay, I did it, let me back in, let the writers vote for me. It didn't work out that way, but he went on a tour promoting this and showed up on ABC for an exclusive interview with Charles Gibson, finally saying, yes, I did it.
Rule 21 in baseball, subsection D. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Any player, umpire, or club, or league official or employee who shall bet any sum whatsoever upon any baseball game in connection with which the bettor has a duty to perform shall be declared permanently ineligible. Permanently ineligible. That's posted in every clubhouse in baseball, isn't it?
A lot of players don't pay much attention to the fine print.
But that's not fine print. That's not infield fly rule. That's not.
It's not as big as you.
It's not when a game becomes official and whatever. That's the most important rule. That's the rule that goes to the integrity and to the authenticity of the game. So why would you violate it?
Well, I wish I could answer that question, but I just can't. I was wrong. Stupid. Worst thing I ever did in my life.
You say
I've had to live with that for 14 years too, Charlie.
Well, it may not have even been the worst thing he did in his life. We'll get to that. But he looked foolish there. He had the dyed hair. He had the shirt collar that he always wore with Hit King on it, or number 14, which was his number that he wore throughout his career. It was just really pathetic. And baseball looked at that and said, no, we're not going to do it. But here's the crazy part of his life. On the field, he did everything that you would ever want a baseball player to do. He played the game hard every single night. He hardly ever missed a game. He was committed to winning more than any other player, or as much as any other player in the history of the game. Everything he did between the lines was correct. Everything he did outside the lines was either illegal, immoral, or just plain stupid. And that is part of the legacy of Pete Rose. No one now alive, and maybe forever, has chronicled the game as well as Tim Kurkjian, a great historian. And just after the news broke last night, he went on ESPN to discuss the legacy, the complicated legacy of the life of Pete Rose.
Well, he's one of the greatest players of all time. He got more hits than anyone in baseball history. And his timing on the field as a player was impeccable. He was always in the right place at the right time. And yet, in retirement, his timing was as bad as it was great on the field when he was a player. He just could not help but do and say the wrong things enough times that got him into trouble and has kept him out of the Hall of Fame. It is a very unfortunate story that this is where we are with Pete Rose. I know I've enjoyed speaking to him. I've enjoyed being around him and growing up and watching him play. It was breathtaking to watch him play, but he made a lot of mistakes along the way. He finally owned up to them, and it's a very complicated legacy for Pete Rose.
Tim, the very first thing you said was one of the greatest players of all time. For anyone who didn't get to watch him play the game of baseball like you did, what should they know about him?
Well, they should know that nobody played harder than he did, and that nobody got more hits than he did, and nobody wanted to win more than he did. I saw him at a card show once, and I was writing a story about him, and he volunteered to me that he played in more winning games than Joe DiMaggio played in games in his career. He actually looked that up on his own just to make sure no one lost sight of the fact of what a great winner he was, and he was. The way he belly flop slide into third base, the way he ran catchers over, the way he played the game was unmistakable. And I'll never forget the first story that I ever wrote as a baseball writer was on Pete Rose. And it was a game in Philadelphia, and it was like a 3-hour rain delay, and they resumed the game at 1:15 in the morning. And Pete Rose was like 40 years old. He singled, stole second, stole third, and then scored on a fly ball to win the game. He was the oldest guy on the field, and that's the way he presented himself. He was the only one that wanted to be there, and he played it harder than everyone else. So that's how we always have to remember Pete Rose for all the mistakes he made. Very few people played the game better and no one played the game harder than he did.
And that's a great summary from Tim about the playing career and also the off the field of Pete Rose. There's more than just the denying of betting on baseball. He went to jail, as I mentioned, for tax evasion, went to card signing shows, never reported the income. And then just 2 years ago, where they had a reunion of the 1980 Phillies World Series championship team, I guess delayed a couple of years because of COVID, he was asked by a female reporter about allegations that he had a sexual relationship with an underage Ohio girl during the 1970s while he was married with 2 kids. That was his first marriage. The claim surfaced during a defamation lawsuit that Rose had filed against John Dowd. John Dowd was the one who did all the investigation of the gambling. He was, doing everything he could to try to get this overturned late in life. And this surfaces along with it, So while he's trying to go after Dowd, oh, by the way, this is in here too. The woman never publicly was identified and said that the sexual relationship began when she was 14 or 15. Rose acknowledged having sex with the woman, but said she was 16. Okay. It was illegal if she was 14 or 15. It's disgusting if she was 16 at the very least. He was married with 2 kids at the time. But under Ohio law, if it was consensual, it would have been legal. And when asked about this is what Rose told the reporter. It was 55 years ago, babe, and then brushed aside the issue, saying, I'm here for the Philly organization, and who cares what happened 50 years ago. So that was sort of his attitude about everything. And had he acknowledged early on that he had bet on baseball, maybe things would have been different. Maybe he would be in the Hall of Fame. Maybe he'd be viewed in a different way instead of the guy who in his later years would sit at a corner stall in the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, sign balls for $100 and bats for $150, and would sit there all day. And he did engage with the fans, the people who saw him play, and those who wanted to overlook all these things loved him, because he embodied exactly what you wanted a baseball player to be. He played the game hard every night, which is damn hard to do when you're playing 162. But he did that. He did all that. So, you look at the legacy of him, and it's as complicated as perhaps anyone we've had in sports. Maybe OJ, you could say as well. OJ was beloved and seemed to do everything right during his career on the field and really off the field with all the commercials and the movies. And, he was as beloved a figure as there was in football. And then came he was acquitted in court of the murders of his ex-wife and a friend of hers. But he was found guilty in civil court and then, of course, went to jail for an armed robbery attempt. And he also passed away this year, which is somewhat ironic. But there's a great blog from Joe Posnanski, who writes as well about sports as anyone. And this couple things here from it that I just wanted to point out about how he became the Pete Rose on the field, which I think is an important element of this. And like Mickey Mantle, he was born to be a baseball player and groomed by a father called Big Pete, who wanted Little Pete to be a star. Now, Mickey Mantle was born with incredible natural skills. Pete Rose was not. Pete Rose was a self-made player or made by his father and others. And I'm going to read you a few paragraphs of what Posnanski has today about Pete Rose and the dad. Big Pete raised his son to be a baseball player, and not just any ball player. He would be a ball player like the Big Pete hero, the ferocious Enos Slaughter, who it was said played baseball the way George Patton played war. That's a great line. When Pete Rose was 8, his father approached the not-whole league coach with a deal. You have to promise to let my son switch hit, Big Pete said, every time. And in exchange, Little Pete would play his heart out every single play in every practice and every game, and that meant every game. He would never miss one. We'd even leave him here on vacation, Big Pete promised. The coach let him switch hit, And little Pete played his heart out and didn't stop for the next 40 years. He cracked more hits than anyone ever had. He ran out his walk, stretched singles into doubles, stretched doubles into triples, and all the while dove headfirst into bases. Look at Charlie Hustle over there, Mickey Mantle once said, mocking when little Pete took a spring training game as seriously as it was Game 7. And Pete loved the game, loved it as much as he loved his nickname, made it his identity. Charlie Hustle, that was the right fit. Before the All-Star game, he came into the clubhouse and took off his shoes, Henry Aaron said, then ran another mile without them. No, Pete Rose never figured out the rest. The women, the gambling, the lies, the addiction, the self-destructive tendencies, all of that was just how he filled the blank spaces when he couldn't be on the diamond playing baseball. On the diamond, he was the hit king. On that diamond, he was exactly the man that Big Pete wanted him to be. And that outlines it about as well as anything you'll find today written about Pete Rose. And it was that was such a stark contrast to how he could handle the rest of his life. And you might make the case that because there was such tunnel vision from Big Pete into making this kid into the ball player that maybe he always wanted to be but couldn't be, because his father played like minor league football, never made it to the big time. And wanted his kid to do it, and his kid did it on grit and hustle and tenacity and knowing the game. I mean, Pete Rose, between the lines, was a genius. Outside the lines, he was a dope. He was a complete dope. And that's what makes his life so interesting, so incredible, that you have on one side this unbelievable baseball career, and on the other, this unbelievable outside the baseball career. The Hall of Fame argument. Now, there's another angle to this, and I was asked about this when I came into work today by my friend John Matthews, the news director at WMAL, and he said, well, do you think Pete Rose will get in the Hall of Fame now? And I said, no, not possible. Most people have run away from him. There's just been too many things off the field that have surfaced, including this report like 10 years ago that he actually bet while he was playing. There's just so much it's not going to happen. Well, now that he's gone, could it happen? I didn't think so, but Bob Nightingale lays out a case in USA Today where it might. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Hey, if you're just jumping in your car, I've spent most of the first part of the show here on Pete Rose, and we do need to get to Dikembe Mutombo, who was as admirable in his post-playing career as Pete Rose was despicable in his post-playing career. But the sizzle, I guess, of the life of Pete Rose is so intriguing, and there's so many different levels to look at here that I think it makes it very compelling to talk about him. Is he someone to be admired? No, except for his playing career. Everything else around it was awful. Just the way he treated women, his ex-wives, his constant lying and cheating, and then this case that surfaced about a sexual relationship with a woman who claimed that she was 14 or 15 years old when he was married with 2 kids in the 70s. I mean, all those things add up to make you go, oh, Pete Rose. But for everything we preach about sports, giving it your best every time you go out there, nobody embodied that more than Pete Rose. So we get to the Hall of Fame question, which has really, as I say, it probably has almost dominated the airwaves of sports radio for the last 35 years. Certainly it's a go-to topic when things are slow, or has been. And even though now Pete Rose has passed away and he received permanent banishment from baseball, permanent ineligibility for the Hall of Fame, and that would seem to transfer over to his death, there is this case which is laid out by Bob Nightingale in USA Today. And he writes today, so now does Pete Rose get into the Hall of Fame? He says, Rose and I frequently discuss the topic, surfacing in virtually every conversation about his Hall of Fame candidacy, but he was always hoping it would never come to this, meaning that the question would come up after his death. And Rose said to him, there are guys who get life sentences in prison, and they're set free before I am. He pointed out the number of steroid users who were in the Hall of Fame. I don't know the only I'm aware of. There have been some allegations and some whose names have appeared in the Mitchell report, like David Ortiz, but I'm not sure that there are any that have been inducted into the Hall of Fame. Now, there are on the ballot, like Barry Bonds has been on the ballot for the Hall of Fame. Roger Clemens has been on the ballot, but I'm not sure about those who are in. He talked about players, Nightingale writes, who were arrested, even suspended for drug use, who became ambassadors for the game. When MLB started embracing gambling, showing gambling shows on its TV network with advertisements plastered on the outfield walls at the ballpark, surely, he said, it was time to let him in. Rose even came up with the classic line after Ippei Mizuhara, Shohei Ohtani's interpreter, was arrested in March for illegal gambling, saying, if I had an interpreter, I'd be in the Hall of Fame. That's a pretty good line. But the cold-hearted truth is that Rose was always painfully aware he might have to be dead to be inducted. This way, and this is a pretty good explanation here, this way, MLB wouldn't ever again have to worry about what he said, what he did, or where he gambled. He can't embarrass the game from the grave. And I wonder if that was a consideration while Rose was having his nose pressed up against the glass, either for Rob Manfred, the current commissioner, or Bud Selig, who took over eventually after Fay Vincent was forced out. This would be 92. There was even that 3-year period of time where Giamatti had died and Vincent took over, where he was, hoping that I don't know if he felt like he had an agreement with Giamatti that they would meet in a year and maybe he'd let him back in, but he never got to that point because Giamatti died of a heart attack a week after banning him from baseball, saying eloquently that he had stained the game and he would have to pay a price. So I don't know, where this goes with Rob Manfred now. I don't know if anybody's had time to ask him if he would consider reinstating Pete Rose, but that is a possibility. As Nightingale writes, Hall of Fame players such as Joe Morgan, who was vice president of the Hall of Fame's board of directors, and former home run king Henry Aaron campaigned for years to get Rose elected to Cooperstown. They spoke on behalf of Rose with 4 different commissioners. No one budged. How can players who were suspended for performance-enhancing drugs, Morgan said, be placed on the Hall of Fame ballot, but not Rose? And Rose said a few years ago, I made mistakes. I can't whine about it. I picked the wrong vice. I should have picked alcohol. I should have picked drugs, or I should have picked up beating up my wife or girlfriend, because if you do those 3, you get a second chance. They haven't given too many gamblers second chances in the world of baseball. Well, again, that's an idiotic statement to make when you're trying to defend yourself, that had you beaten up your wife or your girlfriend, that you would have been entitled to a second chance. That's not how you argue your case. And really, when you look at the totality of all of this, that is really what kept Pete Rose out of the Hall of Fame, was that he was his worst enemy. Every time there was an opportunity for him to put this behind him, to show contrition, to move on from it, he would do things like that. And 83 years, it's a complicated life. It's a complicated legacy. But it is, I think, still very intriguing to talk about. And we'll get to the much, much, much better post-playing career of Dikembe Mutombo, who also sadly passed away yesterday at the age of 58 in the 10 o'clock hour. Meantime, more flowers being thrown in the direction of Jayden Daniels. This has been unbelievable, and it's maybe even more unbelievable in this market than in any other place in the NFL. Like when Aaron Rodgers succeeded Brett Favre, that was really cool in that you were able to keep this Hall of Fame chain alive. But you'd already seen all these great years of Brett Favre, including 2 Super Bowl appearances and a Super Bowl championship. Here, it's been a freaking quarterback disaster. I mean, Terry McLaurin, who's been here only 5 years, this is now his 6th year in the league, he's playing with his 11th different starting quarterback. The parade of quarterbacks post Mark Rippon, who's the last guy to start 5 consecutive seasons for the team, has been outrageous. I think the count is close to 40, something like that. It's absolutely amazing. So it's not just that he's been this good. He's been this good for this team, which has had one quarterback disaster after another. And once again, yesterday on PTI, a national show, it led off the conversation with Tony and Mike.
Wilbon, what are we watching here?
Tony, we're watching, I mean, it's even more than a repeat of C.J. Stroud last year, the number 2 pick, coming out and just setting the world on fire. I think it's even more than that. And maybe because he just looks so in control. Daniel, I'm talking about now. He looks so in control every snap, like nothing phases him. And people keep referring, and maybe this is it, to the 50-plus games he started as a college quarterback. And maybe that has helped him feel as comfortable, but he just seems so masterful about it. And, you know, the team, I want to call them that former name, the Washington football team, they did a great job of protecting him and putting people in place who could protect him, particularly up the middle. And he has room, and he has time, and he has space, and he maximizes it, and he knows exactly where he's going with the football confidently, and people can just go straight to the completion percentage if they want. I'm looking at how you get to the completion percentage, but my God, this kid seems amazing after 4 games.
It is like C.J. Stroud last year, with one exception. Bryce Young, the gap was enormous. Caleb Williams is having a fine season. He just can't touch this kid when the number 2 pick eclipses the number 1 pick at the same position. Washington has had, I believe in the last 3 games, 22 possessions. They've scored on 20 of them.
It's insane.
That's this kid, and this kid in combination with the offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury. I know you're not a big stats guy, but he has completed 82.1% of his passes so far through 4 games. That's the highest percentage ever through 4 games. But, Mike, it's not the first 4 games of his career or the first 4 games of the season. It's 4 games. In other words, it includes Elway, and it includes Montana, and it includes Brady, and it includes Manning. It's all those 4 games. It's really remarkable. I get a lot of emails and texts about the same thing because, you know, I used to take the bandwagon out for the Washington Post, and people say, get it out again. And I respond in the same way all the time. I say, look, the kid looks great, and you hope it's real, but can he stay healthy? Because you don't want, if you're in Washington, you don't want Robert Griffin. You don't want that.
You don't.
And that's why you hold your breath every time he tucks the ball and starts to run.
But, Tony, let me mention real quick. You alluded to it. Let me just, more praise for Kingsbury. Seriously. More praise for him. I mean, look, when he went to interview in Chicago for the Bears offensive coordinator job, I was begging. If you remember, I wanted him because he had worked with Caleb Williams. Look at the quarterbacks he's worked with and look at the results he has.
Kyler Murray.
How long can he be the coordinator in Washington when they're going to be head coaching openings? You wonder about that, too.
Yeah, and maybe for your team, Wilbon, I think if the Bears don't make the playoffs, Cliff Kingsbury is going to be the head coach in Chicago next season. But enjoy it while you can because it's going great so far. And to put into perspective that number that Tony gave you with the completion percentage, 82.1% through 4 games, which no quarterback has ever done through a 4-game stretch ever. Just to give you a perspective on that, this came up last night on the Monday Night Countdown show on ESPN, and Ryan Clark played DB in the league for a long time, including 2 stints here and a big part of his career in Pittsburgh, where he won a Super Bowl with Ben Roethlisberger. Here's his perspective on what 82.1% means in regular games played.
There's something called 7-on-7. That we do at practice. And that means there's no offensive line, no defensive line. And if you're going good on good, so say you're going 1s-on-1s in training camp or practice, Ben Roethlisberger has never completed that many passes against us. His completion percentage has never been that high, and that's without being rushed because you're in the NFL. And when you're in the NFL and you're playing against other good people who scout and who draft and who do all these other things in free agency to bring in other good players, you're normally not good enough to complete that many passes against them if they can't rush you. So to put him in a actual football game on a Sunday or on a Monday night and to have him with other NFL players who make millions and gazillions of dollars and have actual children, right? Some of them multiple. Have a marriage. Some of them multiple. Right? And have ways and find ways to complete that many passes under duress, under the brightest lights. It's truly phenomenal what this young man has done through the first 4 games of his career, and the progression to me is what's more exciting if you're a fan of the Washington Commanders.
And if you've watched every play of all 4 games, as I have, you have seen that progression. And what's the ceiling? Who knows? Is he going to finish the year with 82%? No, but how much lower is it going to go? Is it not going to go below 60? Probably isn't going to go below 65. I mean, he's going to be tickling 70%. Maybe more for the season. It's amazing. It's like, Steph Curry, the greatest three-point shooter of all time. Jayden Daniels is getting numbers in games like Steph Curry probably gets in an open gym, right? Nobody guarding him, just knocking down threes. This is just unbelievable what we're seeing here. And, there's the post-Dan Snyder stress syndrome where you go, oh, boy, when's the other shoe going to drop? Probably not going to happen. At least there's no indication of that happening. And Tom Lovero's got a column about this today. And, Tom wrote for years about the aura of self-destruction with the team. And he noted that after this game in Arizona that Jayden Daniels went up and gave Doug Williams a big hug. They're really got a good relationship going, a mentoring relationship from Williams, and he points out that Doug completed 18 of 29 passes for 4 touchdowns in the 42-10 Super Bowl win over the Broncos nearly 40 years ago. By the way, all 4 of those touchdowns were in the second quarter. And Tom writes, and Tom is not a Mr. Sunshine guy. I've known him for over 20 years. He says, anything seems possible now. Only 4 games into his NFL career, it would be foolish to claim any of them were big games, certainly not Super Bowl games. Yet, for a rookie quarterback, every moment he steps on the field is a big game with big moments, many times overwhelming a young passer. There hasn't been a moment too big yet for Jayden Daniels. He meets every challenge so far, like Doug Williams in San Diego that January afternoon. And, there's a lot of truth to that we are seeing something that was as mind-boggling as what Doug Williams did in San Diego. I was there that day. We were sitting in the auxiliary press section. I was working for WFAN in New York. And in the auxiliary press section, you're actually in seats in the stands. And there were some Denver Bronco fans behind us. And when Denver went up 10-0, people forget, the big blowout that it was. Denver was leading that game 10-0. And it looked like they had a chance to blow this thing open in the first quarter. And these fans were making a lot of noise and Orange Crush. And then the second quarter came and Doug Williams started raining touchdown passes to Ricky Sanders and Gary Clark. And they went away. I never saw them again. And this is kind of, the same kind of thing. Like you're almost hearing Jayden Daniels silence the noise about the quarterback failures of years past. Like it's all being erased with these 4 games. Things could turn. He could get hurt. God forbid. Tony talks about the RG3 comparisons. Let's remember this. RG3's career wasn't ended by a knee injury. RG3's career was ended by RG3, who didn't want to embrace what he needed to do to become a great quarterback. And everything you hear about Jayden Daniels is he's doing everything possible to embrace that. RG3 spent a lot of time showing you how hard he was rehabbing and dragging tires through the woods and doing chin-ups and all that other stuff. That's great. But what Jayden Daniels is doing is getting in the tape room at 5 o'clock in the morning and learning the game, learning the cerebral part of the game. And that's what, as you'll hear Dan Quinn say later on, that is really what has made him so special in these first 4 games. Coming up next hour, more on the great life of Dikembe Mutombo, plus some more of what Bob Costas said in a recent interview with Charlie Rose. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Will we run out of nice things to say about Jayden Daniels? I don't know. That's a nice problem to have, right? If you're a fan of this team and watch the parade of stinko quarterbacks. And by the way, if you watched any of last night, Jared Goff was perfect, 18 for 18. He's one of those guys. The rest of these guys, Mason Rudolph, Snoop Huntley, the drop-off is severe. So hopefully number 5 stays upright and things continue on this path. But if they don't, boy, it is bleak in the NFL once you get past the starting quarterbacks and the elite starting quarterbacks in the league. A lot of guys who are starting aren't that good. So, it's a wonderful time to be a Commander fan, and that hasn't been the case for a long time, as they are now 3-point favorites heading into the Cleveland game on Sunday. Interesting, they opened as 3.5-point favorites, and that's now down to 3. Maybe it's just, if you can't believe it's going to be this good for this long. Like, the defense still has its weaknesses, though they played much better in Arizona than they had in the past. Some of that may have been the way Arizona played. I mean, I don't really understand what they were trying to do there. It just didn't work. And the opening drive where they scored, it was only 55 yards because of the way the kickoff went. It would return to the 40, fumble up to the 45, so it was only a 55-yard drive. And then they did score another touchdown. Yeah, you're going to figure they're going to get another. But even at the end, when they were still kind of in it, like was it 27-14? They're running the ball. So anyway, that's where they stand, and it's all good. And we'll get to more on how things are going so well. Comments from Dan Quinn yesterday as he held his usual Monday session with reporters. They're off today, and then they get back to it on Wednesday, getting ready for the Cleveland game. But the news broke yesterday morning, just after we got off the air here, that Dikembe Mutombo had died at the age of 58. He'd been diagnosed with brain cancer a couple of years ago and died. And it was just, so sad to hear about that, because he was such a wonderful person, not necessarily when he was competing on the court, because he was tough to deal with, one of the greatest shot blockers of all time. I think he's in the discussion with Bill Russell for that. And also that he would, after he would block a shot, he'd wag your finger at you. The sportsmanship angle of that was kind of tough to get your head around. But off the court, a very funny, engaging guy. He spoke, I think, 6 different languages, and I don't even think English was his second language. Had grown up in Africa, and like a lot of athletes there, had started out with soccer first. But he attracted some attention because of his height. So they said, well, you really ought to try basketball. You're almost 7 feet tall. So like a lot of big men who pick it up for the first time, he had some trouble with it. He slipped during a drill, tearing open his chin and infuriating his mother, as it says in the obit in the Post today. He quit for a time, but took up the sport again on concrete outdoor courts while studying at a Jesuit high school. His playing attracted the attention of an official at a U.S. Agency for International Development, who sent a videotape of Mutombo to John Thompson, the coach at Georgetown. The boy had a rag tied around his head and was playing on what looked like grass and was blocking all kinds of shots, Thompson wrote in his 2020 autobiography, I Came as a Shadow. Mutombo, who was then about 21, so that's pretty late to be transitioning to basketball. Most guys start to play it when they're like 6, and they go through the ranks and play it certainly in high school. And he was late to the game. So he was 21, came to Washington, spent his first year at Georgetown learning English and playing intramural basketball. I don't know if Thompson thought he was good enough to be on the team, but this also ties in to what he did during Mutombo's first year playing on the team, which would have been the 88-89 season. He played 3 seasons at Georgetown, 88 to 91. And in January of 1989, Thompson famously walked off the court to protest what was on the table for the NCAA called Prop 42. It eventually became Prop 48 with some revisions made, but the idea was that if you didn't qualify academically, even if you had a scholarship, which they would honor, you couldn't compete in sports. And the levels were 700 on the SAT or 15 of 36 on the ACT and a 2.0 grade point average. And Thompson felt that was culturally biased and famously, right before a game, walked off the court. And that is remembered as part of the legacy of John Thompson, who later told me that, he looked at Mutombo, and said, had this been in place when he was first at Georgetown, he would have been ineligible, and he was one of the most intelligent people he ever met and spoke like 6 or 7 languages. So that was all part of the picture too. But Mutombo, when he started to play, had this incredible athletic ability, and once blocked 12 shots in a game. He was just a tremendous part of what should have been a Final Four team. He played with Alonzo Mourning at a time when big men really mattered. But they went into the tournament one year as the number 1 seed. I think that was the year Mutombo was a sophomore, and they were almost knocked off by Princeton. They lost that game 51-50. And so they were a team that was capable of winning it all, but never made it to a Final Four with Mourning and Mutombo. But it's the post-playing career that really sticks out about Mutombo. Not that he wasn't a great player, not that he wasn't the 4th pick of the draft, and not that he didn't have one of the great images in the history of sports, that in his, I guess, 3rd or 4th year, 1994, when the Nuggets, as an 8th seed, were playing the Seattle Supersonics, and I hope they get another team back there. My son lives there now. He'd like to root for them. But anyway, he after they pulled off this monstrous upset, the image of Mutombo on the floor gripping the ball in joy is one of the great images of victory in the history of sports. And he played 18 years. He played until he was 42 years old. And you know, the story I like to tell, the 2001 All-Star Game, which was played here in Washington and played at what is now Capital One Arena. It was MCI, I believe, at the time. And, you know, now the All-Star Game is a complete joke. But in those days, it was played more like a regular game. And Larry Brown was the coach of the East. And he had Allen Iverson on his team with Philadelphia and on the Eastern team, and Iverson wound up being the MVP of the game. But they were way behind. It was like down by 20 points in the 3rd quarter. And he put Mutombo in, who was then playing for the Hawks, with Iverson, and he watched them work together, and he said, hey, that's what I need. And in those days, the trade deadline was after the All-Star game. He quickly made a trade for Mutombo. Mutombo and Iverson made the finals. That was the one time Iverson made the finals, and they actually won the first game against the Lakers before a better Laker team with Kobe and Shaq won the title that year. So there was that in the playing career. But while he was a player, it says here in the obit in the Post, he returned to his home country in Africa, and during the offseason led basketball clinics and paid for the national women's team to travel to the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. Through his foundation, he spearheaded the construction of a 300-bed hospital that opened in the Congo in 2007. The hospital was named in honor of his mother, who died of a stroke 10 years earlier after she was unable to receive medical help because of a citywide curfew. He spent a decade trying to finance and build the $29 million hospital, personally donating $15 million to the project and soliciting funds from fellow NBA players. The Congolese ambassador at the time told USA Today that the hospital was a godsend for the city, and President George W. Bush at the State of the Union address in 2007 praised Mutombo as an example of heroic kindness and courage and self-sacrifice. The news breaks sometime yesterday morning, maybe 11 o'clock or so. Dan Le Batard is on with his show, and this is what makes guys like Le Batard great. A great writer who can seize a moment and write basically a column in his head and deliver it on the air. Tony does this very well. There are several others who have been columnists and are able to do this. So this is Le Batard on the fly, reacting to the death of Dikembe Mutombo.
This pipeline in Georgetown of big guys that went Ewing, Mourning, and Mutombo, and then Mutombo gets to the NBA, and he's more colorful than either one of the other two, brooding giants who came out of Georgetown. The offensive game he wasn't the player on offense that Mourning and Ewing were.
No.
But as a personality, he was so much fun. To hear that he has died at the age of 58 of brain cancer, 3 years older than me, when I really do associate Mutombo Stugotz with life, with living large with being somebody who was not just an ambassador on behalf of helping the game become more international, but with a single finger, he had more personality than so many players in that sport when he would block shots and he would tell you, no, no, no. And anyone who knows what Mutombo was off the court knows how giving and fun he was. To have that big of a life extinguished so young, landed wrong, felt wrong, and just seemed to me uncommonly heavy for someone I've only talked to a handful of times, but had a personality that sort of jumped off of your television screen, had learned our language, okay? So he was always doing all of his interviews in his second language, doing it through
did them well, by the way.
Yes, excellently, right. through a heavy accent, and allowed us to, guys, when you say did them well, just so that you understand how difficult, the degree of difficulty was on how it is that Mutombo achieved stardom as a defensive player and as a life force. Think of how you have trouble connecting with even someone like Jokic or Doncic when they're trying to introduce you to who they are in a second language. It can become difficult to feel like you know those players, that you feel like you're rooting beyond the basketball for someone whose personality is something that you like to be around.
And just to give you an example of what Le Batard is talking about, is a very distinctive voice from Mutombo. The voice had incredible deepness and resonance to it. Tony, in fact, likened it to James Earl Jones yesterday, but the accent was very, very strong. And it was, he did master the English language and was very eloquent in what he said and funny at times. But this is from his Hall of Fame induction in 2015, and the way it works is that you can bring up one or two or maybe even three Hall of Famers to join you on the stage when you deliver your speech. They just don't say anything. And the two that he chose, one was obvious, and John Thompson, his coach, who at Georgetown for the 3 years he played there. And the other was David Stern, the commissioner of the league. And the first person that Mutombo thanked when he opened his speech in 2015 going into the Hall of Fame was, in fact, John Thompson.
When I was an NBA rookie, someone asked me what I thought my career would be like. I never dreamed it would include this. I'm so honored to be in the Basketball Hall of Fame. I only want to be remembered as one of the best defense players to ever play this game. I like to think that I accomplished that. The gentleman on my right means so much to me. Coach John Thompson. I learned a lot under Coach Thompson. I learned about the game of basketball, but most importantly, I learned how to be a man in this society. He's really a father figure to all of us who got a chance to play for him at Georgetown University.
That was 9 years ago when Mutombo in the Hall of Fame. Sadly, he's gone. John Thompson is gone, and David Stern as well. And just more example of the impact that Mutombo had, not just on the NBA, but in his home country in Africa, that there were others who followed, and followed in large part because of things that he did. One of them, Masai Ujiri, who was the general manager of the Toronto Raptors, led them to an NBA championship, I think 6 or 7 years ago. And yesterday, just the death of Mutombo happened to coincide with Media Day for all the teams. So Ujiri is up there to talk to the press about the upcoming season for the Raptors, and he's hit with this news that his friend and mentor has passed away. And it took him a good couple of minutes to compose himself before he said this.
He did so much for us, for the continent of Africa, for his people. I went to Dikembe Mutombo's hospital And in Dikembe Mutombo's hospital in Kinshasa, you go to that hospital and it doesn't even smell like a hospital. You don't understand that I grew up in hospitals. I grew up in hospitals. That's how much pride this guy had. That's how much pride he had in doing good for his people. I built a court with him in Bujumbura, in his village, and spent a lot of time with him there. And what he's brought to youth on the continent, to people on the continent, we cannot even imagine. You cannot even imagine what that guy has done for me in my career. Yeah. He took me by the wings in Denver, and made me grow as a person. And now he's gone. He's left us. I treated my family, my kids. I remember in my house. Yeah. But everybody, there's nobody that Mutombo did not touch. Nobody. Everything you see as big as he is, his heart was bigger. Yeah, today is not a good day. Not a good day for sports, for us. For us in Africa, it's not a good day at all. But we'll celebrate him, and we'll celebrate him big. Because he set a path for us that, I don't know many people that can do it.
Yeah, now there's one more thing that I wanted to play from his remarks, and maybe it's a cliche to say that someone who is 7 feet tall was larger than life, but I think he articulated it very well here. And as you look back on the life of Dikembe Mutombo, this in about a minute or so sums things up very well.
Yeah, that guy he's bigger than life. I'm telling you, bigger. As big as his big shoes were, as big as his hands were, he was bigger as a person, and his heart was bigger. You have to, one day, if you are anywhere near there, you have to go to Dikembe Mutombo's hospital that he built. It's something with pride, that somebody spent his own money, raised money to do something like that on the continent, to take care of people. You cannot, always had time for every child, every person, everybody that came to speak to him, traveled with him in airports, his big legs hanging high. There's nobody like Dikembe Mutombo. Nobody like him.
Rest in peace, Dikembe Mutombo. We'll go through the Dan Quinn news conference from Ashburn yesterday. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Rams up at 11. If you're not familiar with our lineup, which we've had, I guess, a little less than a month now, it's Bram at 11, Tony at 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, today is Tuesday, so I'm guessing he's not doing a show today, but be very interested to hear his thoughts on Pete Rose. He and Mike talked about Dikembe Mutombo yesterday, who they both covered at Georgetown. And Tony actually covered Pete Rose as a baseball writer, or, I guess he was doing a bunch of things, but he was, I think, at the New York Times and followed him as he pursued the 44-game hitting streak that he ultimately reached. 78, he was chasing Joe DiMaggio, who he never reached. But he, day by day would hold court with the writers, and he knew his numbers and everybody else's numbers, and then eventually caught Ty Cobb and finished his career with a hit total that is somewhat ironic, 4,256, meaning that he had 4,256 hits, but the first two numbers. The only number that is retired in baseball, number 42 for Jackie Robinson, and 56 is the 56-game hitting streak for Joe DiMaggio. So something interesting there. Also, thank God sanity prevailed on this, that baseball, after what they got from the All-Star game and should have, those ridiculous uniforms that they wore, baseball is going back to using primary team uniforms for the All-Star game, scrapping the special jerseys that they've used for the last 4 years. Club uniforms were used by the American League from 1933 to 2019, by the National League from 1934 to 2019. Players from the All-Star host team will wear the home whites. The other team will wear the road grays, as it should be. And Home Run Derby participants will wear the home team uniforms for the Derby. Those looked absolutely ridiculous last year. And I don't know, it's the way these things work. A bunch of middle-aged white guys get together in a room and decide what young people really like. And, in fact, the audience is older people like me who don't like those kind of things. So thank God tradition prevails there. Before we get to the comments yesterday from Dan Quinn on the wonderful season that Jayden Daniels is having, this kind of surprised me yesterday. The NFL released a statement that basically Brandon McManus is free to go. You remember what happened here in the offseason? He'd been a kicker with Jacksonville, pretty decent kicker for them, and they had decided that they weren't going to re-sign Joey Sly. So they bring in McManus. They had a news conference for him, the whole deal. And then shortly before training camp opens, there's word that there's a civil suit that was filed against McManus for his behavior on a team flight that Jacksonville took to London last year, and that he was, giving the flight attendants $100 bills, asking them to dance and patting them on the behind, and he was drunk and all that. And there was no criminal charges filed, but the civil suit. Well, rightly so. The Commanders said, we can't have any part of this with our history, with Dan Snyder just out the door with a $60 million fine for running a toxic organization. So he was cut. Now, the suit was dismissed in court, but it was dismissed on a technicality. And it was dismissed because the accusers had not been named in this. So it's now been refiled, and it's still pending in court. But the league said this: there was insufficient evidence to support a finding that a violation of the personal conduct policy occurred. And as always, if new evidence is presented, it would be taken into consideration. The league conducted an investigation of the allegations, the lawsuit pending in Duval County Civil Court. McManus is a free agent after being released. It's not immediately clear if anybody wants to sign him. His attorney has not commented on this, but Anthony Busby, who is representing the accusers, said he was confused by this. We are still working to schedule a meeting between the NFL's investigators and our clients. The NFL has not yet spoken with our clients, so I'm a bit confused as to why anyone would conclude this at this point. The women filed an amended complaint in early September after a judge dismissed their original complaint, which was filed under the pseudonyms Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2. The judge ruled the circumstances of the case did not meet the Florida rules for anonymity. So that was the only technicality there. They just put their names on the suit and refiled, and the NFL looked at it and said, nah, nothing to see here. So he could, the way they go through kickers, and they've had, 5 now, and looks like they got the right guy who has not yet missed a field goal or an extra point. But, kickers go bad. They go bad like cheese, and you have to find one to take his place. Interesting breakdown today by Sam Fortier in the Post of the Jayden Daniels interception on Sunday, the one blemish that he's had. And Nick Allegretti, one of the free agents they signed, a guard in the offseason, who played on Kansas City's 3 Super Bowl teams, he said after the game, well, yeah, it's about time he made a mistake. And he also was impressed at the way that he was able to respond to that, shake it off. And he said, you don't want to throw a pick at all, but that's football, Daniel said. Yeah, and I saw the news conference where he just, understood that these things happen in the game of football. It's just a deal. Now, here's what Fortier writes about it. And he basically is making the case, good to get this out of the way because you don't want this hanging over his head, and it comes in a win, so you don't really have to worry about it too much. He said, but the throw is notable for its location. Before the draft, some analysts criticized Daniels for rarely throwing to the middle of the field, especially on intermediate routes, 10 to 22 yards. Of course, Daniels threw deep and outside more often, his supporters argued. LSU wide receivers Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas were two of the nation's best perimeter threats, but the question still lingered. Quote, he was not entirely comfortable working between the numbers, which can cause him to hit the receiver a few yards later than he should ideally, and it is something that can be punished even more against NFL defenders, Yahoo's Nate Tice wrote. In the 4 games, Daniels has looked fine over the middle. He has had 13 intermediate attempts, tied for 6th in the NFL, according to the website True Media, and completed 12 of them for 207 yards and a touchdown. While the interception came on a slightly deeper throw, 31 air yards, the adjustments that Daniels and Terry McLaurin wanted to make would have played out with similar timing and spacing to those routes over the middle. And so, they're saying he's been just fine throwing over the middle. This was a longer throw. He screwed up a little bit, but so what? He's proven that he's learning from his mistakes. I mean, one of the things I've been really impressed about him is that he is sliding like a baseball slide now. The first game, remember, against Tampa, he ran a lot when he ran 16 times, which was the most ever for a rookie quarterback. And it's basically you're getting into Lamar Jackson territory when you do that. And he was sliding head first. At least he was sliding, getting down, but, you worry about that. And then the big hit he took against the Giants, where it looked like maybe he broke his ribs, but fortunately only missed one play. But those things seem to be learning experiences for him. He's handling it differently when he gets in the open field. He slides, he runs out of bounds, which is what he needs to do, and he's becoming more of a pocket passer, which has, resulted in these numbers, which are mind-blowing. I mean, he's completed 82% of his passes through 4 games. That's historically good for any quarterback anytime over a 4-game stretch. So, of course, you would think that Dan Quinn would be asked about that at yesterday's news conference, like, what do you make of this? I mean, this is like historically good. What is going on here?
It's not a magic that's going into this. I know that's hard to say, but he absolutely works his ass off. I would say that, number one. The time that he spends getting ready, getting prepared. I'd said it the other night on this trip. There's many nights their office on the quarterback room was, just a few doors down from mine, and Thursday nights, and just staying in there, going through it again and again. He really puts in the work. So when the game time comes, there's a confidence that comes from that. And so I love the connection that everybody in that quarterback room has. It's Cliff, obviously, and Brian and Tavita and David Blau and the other quarterbacks that are with him. They really support the hell out of him, and featuring players of the things that they can do well, which Jayden can do a lot of things well, but finding those things that the other receivers can do well in different spots, different routes. I think that's some of this, but to think, he would start like this, no, I don't think anybody would have said that. But what I would say is that if you're around him, you feel this work ethic, and there's no, magic pixie dust that we're throwing into him. It is absolutely grinding, working, and a lot of confidence comes from that, because he can enter the game knowing that he put the work in.
And it's far, far too early to start any Tom Brady comparisons. So don't confuse this. I'm not saying this, but what did you hear about Brady? He embraced the grind. And that's what drives a lot of guys out of the league. They just can't do this for as long as he did it, 23 years. And Jayden Daniels, right at the start of it, understands that that's what it takes to be good. You have to do that. And there's a big flap this week. I don't know how closely you followed this, but you had in Tampa a suggestion that there was high stress when Brady was the quarterback there. And Baker Mayfield, said that when he got there, the teammates, you're here, we can kind of relax a little bit, something to that effect. And Brady said, what's stressful? Not having rings. That's what's stressful. And Bill Walsh, the same thing. People who played for him, it wasn't fun. It was hard. It's hard work. The fun comes in winning. That's the fun. But you got to put in the time to do it, and it's more than the workouts on the field. It's more than the time in the weight room. It's the time in the room where you examine the tape and you go over it and over it. And you meet with the receivers, get your timing down, and that has really been the difference there, I think. I mean, he's physically talented in many ways, including running and throwing the ball. That's obvious. But the difference between a lot of these rookie quarterbacks and what you're seeing from him is that he is understanding the game on a cerebral level and putting in the hours to make that happen. There's no shortcuts here, and that's what Quinn is saying. There's no pixie dust. He's doing it. Did he think it would happen like this? No. But he also saw that this was a guy who was willing to put in the time to make it happen, which is what has exactly occurred. Now, this is another good question that was asked of him yesterday. I think it was John Keim that asked it, and he said, you're a defensive guy. Put yourself on the other side here. How would you look to defend this offense if you had to do it?
I think there's probably more than one thing, like most offenses that are tough to defend. I'd say there's an element of tempo, John, right, where it can be in and out at the line, working some things, some with cadence, some without. Then there's the element, like I was hitting earlier, about the runs and the play passes that go with it. And if you can make those two things look similar, John, with gap schemes and pulls, and then, be able to throw, to the tight end and, slants off of run action, that can make it challenging because your eyes are obviously at the line of scrimmage ready to defend the run and then, to rip a play pass to go. And then I would say that the third element, which is not necessarily scheme driven, but it's Jayden and his ability to create, a second play, that make it difficult. So it's run and play pass. That's a combination. And then the combination of Jayden, outside the pocket, with his legs, creating some first downs. That's what makes it tough. But the tempo is a big part of it too.
Yeah, and the Cliff Kingsbury has really designed something here that's just perfect for him. And Kingsbury, he's going to be, if this keeps up, he's going to be the number one head coaching prospect in the offseason. And again, I think if the Bears don't make the playoffs, he's going to reunite with Caleb Williams next year in Chicago. Last thing is all these stats, the mind-blowing stats about what they've done in these first 4 games. Quinn asked yesterday which was the one he liked the best.
I would say one of the topics that we look for are runs and completions together. When you add those two, I don't know if that's in the billions of stats, but it's one that I like. So when they are 55 or over, you have a good chance to really possess the ball. And so that's one of the ones that I always like to see, and that was well above that in this game. So I would say the ability to have these completions, and that's just not Jayden. That's the protection, to have a game where, the offensive line was able to protect and allow him to, deliver the ball to the right spots. That's a big deal too. But that's one of the ones that that I'm always looking for. And to see that come through on a few of the games so far, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to do that. You put the completions and the runs, and you want it to total over 55. And a lot of times, things don't go your way offensively. You're running less than 60 plays in a game. So if you've got 55 with completions and runs, and they have been able to dominate time of possession, which is very important with a defense which, despite the improved play on Sunday, still has a lot of weaknesses, and you want to keep that defense off the field as much as possible, and they've done a good job with that. And what you heard about Cliff Kingsbury coming in, oh, yeah, the wild 4-wide offense, blah, blah. They run the ball, and he's got the bell cow to do it with Brian Robinson. Robinson does not fumble, knock wood, and he moves the chains. He's the perfect clock-eating type of running back. That's what you want. So they've done a really good job all around with that. So that's a stat that you have to look for yourself, because I don't know if they really give you that in all the various stats that you had, but you put completions and runs together and you wanted to top 55. Not 55%, but 55 total. That's interesting. Coming up, Bram will have his show at 11. I'll be back here tomorrow at 9. See you then.